Listen closely, because what's unfolding right now has never happened before in the entire span of American governance. I'm not exaggerating for effect. We've had constitutional emergencies, political earthquakes, moments that tested our system. This surpasses all of them. Just after 3 o'clock this morning, Eastern Standard Time, a messenger left the Vice President's official home carrying 2 identical sealed letters, one headed to the House Speaker's office, the other to the Senate's presiding officer. Both contained the same single-page document signed by the Vice President alongside 8 cabinet secretaries, formally declaring that the sitting president cannot fulfill the responsibilities of the executive office. If you're watching this for the first time, subscribe immediately, because what I'm explaining isn't theoretical analysis or political speculation. We're witnessing constitutional mechanisms engaged that have remained dormant since their creation, and every American needs to grasp what's actually occurring for the first time in history. The 4th section of the 25th Amendment is being activated, but here's where routine procedure transforms into genuine national emergency. The president hasn't acknowledging this action. The president hasn't stepped back. Multiple sources confirm the president remains inside the executive mansion, has ordered Secret Service personnel to block the vice president from accessing the property, and is publicly characterizing this constitutional process not as legitimate governance, but as an illegal overthrow attempt. So that means America currently has 2 individuals claiming executive authority, 2 people directing federal operations, 2 people exercising presidential command, and standing directly in that impossible contradiction is every branch of American government, beginning with those who maintain our nuclear deterrent capabilities. Before we continue, we need absolute clarity on what the 25th Amendment's 4th section actually authorizes, because widespread misunderstanding about this provision is actively fueling the crisis. When most people consider the 25th Amendment, they think about succession protocols. The president passes away, and the vice president assumes office. That's the 1st section, straightforward and previously utilized. The 4th section operates entirely differently. This provision was crafted for a nightmare scenario its authors prayed would never materialize, designed specifically for when a president remains alive, remains conscious, continues asserting authority, yet those in closest proximity have determined that continuing presidential power in that individual's hands poses unacceptable danger. Perhaps the president has suffered catastrophic medical trauma and lost communication ability. Perhaps surgical complications have rendered them temporarily incapable, and this represents the provision's most difficult application. Perhaps senior officials have concluded the president's decision-making has deteriorated so severely that the republic itself faces existential threat. The 4th section permits the vice president, combined with the cabinet majority, this 8 signatures, to submit formal written notice to Congress declaring presidential incapacity. The instant congressional leadership receives that declaration, not after debate, not following hearings, not pending judicial examination, but immediately, presidential authority transfers to the vice president. It functions like an emergency power cutoff. So that transfer occurred at 3:14 this morning. Constitutionally speaking, legally speaking, the vice president became acting president at that precise moment. However, the Constitution provides the president a response mechanism. Should the president deliver their own written statement to Congress asserting continued capability, their authority reinstates automatically. Unless the vice president and cabinet transmit a second declaration within 4 days challenging that assertion, when that happens, Congress must resolve the dispute. We're currently in this sequence's opening phase. The declaration reached Capitol Hill. The president hasn't yet filed their counterstatement. Sources indicate that letter is being composed right now. Here's relevant historical context. During October 1919, President Woodrow Wilson experienced a devastating stroke. Partial paralysis affected him. His speech became impaired. His mental faculties substantially declined. So for the final 17 months of his term, the American public was systematically deceived about their president's actual condition. Wilson's spouse, Edith Wilson, exercised total control over who could reach him. She determined which paperwork he reviewed. She filtered which advisors gained access. She essentially governed while maintaining the pretense that he remained in charge. When the truth eventually surfaced, it shocked legislators. The realization that a medical catastrophe could essentially hijack the presidency, that no constitutional tool existed to address a living but incapacitated president, became a serious concern. And that anxiety intensified following President Kennedy's murder. What if Kennedy had survived Dallas but remained permanently unresponsive? What if a president collapsed during a nuclear emergency and couldn't communicate, yet couldn't be replaced? The 25th Amendment gained ratification in 1967 precisely to prevent such scenarios. It was meant to guarantee governmental continuity. It was meant to ensure America would never lack a functioning chief executive. But here's what that amendment's creators assumed. They assumed good faith participation. They assumed that cabinet members taking such an extraordinary constitutional step would be met with presidential recognition of the situation's gravity and cooperation with established procedures. They never anticipated this. They never imagined a president who would examine the Constitution and declare it inapplicable to their situation. Hit that like button immediately if you comprehend the magnitude of what we're observing. Engagement directly impacts whether this information reaches those who desperately need it. Let me describe what sources inside the executive mansion are reporting right now. Multiple accounts depict a building in absolute chaos. Staff members are crying openly in corridors. Some are filling boxes with personal items. Others are destroying documents in shredders. The chief of staff, who apparently declined to sign the fourth section declaration, is now orchestrating a media campaign portraying this entire sequence as an unlawful power grab. Simultaneously, different aides are preparing executive orders intended to dismiss every cabinet member who signed that declaration. The State Department head, the Defense Department head, the Justice Department head. The president wants them removed. This creates a constitutional paradox legal experts have never confronted in actual practice. If the cabinet signed first and authority transferred when delivery occurred, can the president subsequently terminate those cabinet members? Do their signatures retain validity after termination? Or did they cease being presidential subordinates the instant that letter reached Congress? No precedent exists for this question. No definitive answer is available. The Constitution doesn't address it because its framers assume nobody would ever attempt to exploit this gap. What exists right now is a government occupying two mutually exclusive states simultaneously. We have two command hierarchies, two authority chains, two individuals issuing directives that cannot both carry legal force. And nowhere does that contradiction become more dangerous than regarding nuclear armaments. Follow me closely because this aspect becomes genuinely terrifying. Wherever the president travels, a military officer accompanies him carrying a particular briefcase. You've seen it, the nuclear football. It holds launch verification codes, the materials necessary to authorize atomic weapons, deployment. And the vice president also has a military officer with an identical case. Under ordinary circumstances, the vice president's codes remain dormant. They're standby protocols. They only activate if the president is confirmed dead or officially incapacitated. At 3:14 this morning, when that fourth section declaration was delivered, the vice president constitutionally became acting president according to the amendment's text. That means their launch codes should have activated at that moment and the president's codes should have deactivated. But who actually executes that determination and who throws that switch? And that decision flows through the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. According to sources, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is currently in the tank, the building's most secure conference facility, grappling with a question no chairman has ever faced. Which codes carry legitimacy? Whose directives does the military execute? If the president contacts command right now, ordering a nuclear strike, does the military carry out that directive? Or do they refuse based on grounds that presidential authority no longer exists? If they refuse and they're mistaken, they've just committed the most significant act of military insubordination in American history. If they comply and they're mistaken, they've just executed an illegal directive from someone lacking presidential authority. And here's the critical point about nuclear deterrence. It relies on certainty. It depends on adversaries knowing without ambiguity that American nuclear forces operate under coherent command structure. The moment uncertainty appears, the moment visible confusion exists about who controls those, weapons as deterrence weakens. Our adversaries are monitoring the situation right now. They're watching the American command structure fragment in real time, and they're making calculations. So why did the cabinet act? Why invoke the fourth section tonight specifically? According to a senior Justice Department official who briefed reporters, the cabinet assembled secretly last night at the Naval Observatory following a specific incident that afternoon. Details continue emerging, and we must exercise caution distinguishing confirmed facts from allegations, but multiple sources point toward identical events. The president allegedly issued direct orders for a military operation on domestic territory, specifically allegedly ordering active military forces to confiscate voting equipment in a swing state before the approaching election. The defense secretary reportedly refused to relay that order. The president allegedly threatened termination and proceeding through alternative channels, and that, according to declaration signatories, represented the threshold. That was the moment they concluded the emergency provision existed precisely for this circumstance, that failing to act last night meant American military personnel might deploy against American citizens by morning. This wasn't, in their assessment, a policy disagreement. This wasn't partisan maneuvering. This was, they believed, the final safeguard, the emergency mechanism, the last resort the 25th Amendment was designed to provide. The president, however, presents a drastically different narrative. Despite aides reportedly attempting to confiscate communication devices, continuous social media posting has occurred. Claims circulate that globalist infiltrators have penetrated the cabinet. The constitutional action is being characterized as treasonous supporters are being summoned to Washington, and that final element has law enforcement genuinely alarmed. Drop a comment immediately. Tell me your location. I need to understand this information's reach because Americans need to comprehend what's happening. The president posted a message several hours ago reading, "Come to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Protect your president." We're now seeing live footage of crowds assembling near the executive mansion. People are arriving by vehicle, by subway, walking. Some visibly carry weapons. DC Metropolitan Police are overwhelmed. National Guard support requests have been transmitted. And here's where the constitutional crisis creates an operational nightmare. In Washington, D.C., unlike states, National Guard deployment authority belongs to the president, the district lacks a governor, and the president controls D.C. Guard units. So if the vice president, who constitutionally holds acting presidential authority, orders the National Guard to establish perimeter security and protect federal facilities, and the president issues contradictory orders telling those same Guard members to withdraw, whose command carries legal force? Who do those soldiers obey? The individual who won election or the individual holding constitutional authority under 25th Amendment emergency provisions? No manual addresses this, no training scenario covers it, and no precedent exists. Every commander, every soldier, every officer is now making individual judgments about which orders to follow, and incorrect choices in any direction could prove catastrophic. Now let's discuss the Secret Service, because developments there might represent the most immediate flashpoint. Secret Service agents trained to protect the president. They build relationships across years, they develop personal connections, and they're conditioned to sacrifice their lives if necessary for their assigned protectee. And now, overnight, they're being informed that the individual they protected no longer holds the presidency. They're being told that the vice president stationed across town is now their principal. According to sources, this contradiction has created open division inside Secret Service Command. The presidential protective detail head is reportedly blocking the vice president's security team from White House access. His stated position: I follow presidential orders. Until he departs this building, nobody enters. Consider what that means. Armed federal agents, all Secret Service, facing each other across the security perimeter, the president's detail on one side, the acting president's detail on the opposite, both sides believing they're executing lawful orders, and meanwhile, the vice president is improvising. He cannot enter the Oval Office. He cannot access the Situation Room. He's attempting to conduct presidential business from the Eisenhower Executive Office building next door, working from a conference room, coordinating with whatever cabinet members and staff will acknowledge his authority. The elected president occupies the physical power seat. The constitutional acting president holds the legal authority, and neither can remove the other without potentially triggering a confrontation nobody is prepared for. Subscribe immediately if you haven't already. Activate the notification bell. You need to be here for what follows because the constitutional clock is now running. Here's how this sequence unfolds. According to the amendment's text, the president has the right to send written declaration to Congress stating no incapacity exists and that they remain able to discharge office duties. Sources indicate that letter is being drafted as we speak. The moment that letter reaches the Speaker and Senate President, pro tempore presidential authority reverts to them immediately, just as it transferred away immediately when the Cabinet's letter arrived. But then the burden shifts. The Vice President and Cabinet have 4 days to respond. If they transmit a second declaration reaffirming presidential incapacity, authority transfers back to the Vice President and Congress is forced to act. Under the amendment, Congress must convene within 48 hours, and from there, they have 21 days to resolve the question, and the threshold is extraordinarily high. Permanently removing the president requires a 2/3 vote in both chambers. If that threshold fails, the president regains authority, which means we're potentially facing 21 days of constitutional limbo, 21 days during which the legitimate presidential authority holder remains genuinely unclear, 21 days during which every executive directive, every military deployment, every diplomatic communication exists in a contested legitimacy gray zone. Markets are already responding. Futures are collapsing. Foreign capitals are in chaos. One report indicates the British Prime Minister attempted calling the White House and was held for 20 minutes because nobody could determine who possessed authorization to accept the call. This is what systemic breakdown appears like. This is what Americans have observed happening in other nations and convinced ourselves could never occur here. It's occurring here. And there exists a genuine risk, a clear and present risk, that this turns violent if the president continues urging supporters to gather at the White House. If those crowds attempt breaching the perimeter, if law enforcement or military personnel are trapped between conflicting orders about whether to disperse them or protect them, we're no longer discussing a constitutional debate. We're discussing armed confrontation on American territory. We're discussing the possibility of Americans killing Americans over a disputed presidential claim. The Constitution was designed to flex under pressure. It has bent previously. It bent during the Civil War. It bent during Watergate. It bent during contested elections, but it was never designed to be stretched this severely in this many directions simultaneously. And what we're witnessing right now is the American governmental system at its fracture point. And the next decision by one person in one room will determine whether it holds. I am staying on this. I have feeds monitoring the White House, the Capitol, and the Pentagon. If the president transmits their counter-declaration to Congress, I will read it to you in real time. If the Joint Chiefs issue a statement, you will hear it here. If there's any movement at any of those 3 locations, we will be covering it live. Do not assume this resolves quietly. Do not assume the institutions will hold simply because they always have. Do not assume that safeguards existing on paper will function when tested by someone willing to ignore. Then the 25th Amendment has been invoked. The president is refusing to comply. 2 command chains are asserting authority. Armed agents are facing each other. Crowds are gathering and the world is watching. Like this broadcast, share it. Send it to everyone you know. This is one of those moments where history pivots, where the future gets decided in real time. People need to see this. They need to understand what's happening to their country right now. So the mechanism has been triggered. The question now is what comes next. Stay here. Stay alert. It'll be back the moment anything breaks.